Hello and welcome to Harper Reads. We are going to start in our second live reading of the Adventures of Ulysses. And just a little recap what we've been over here. We read through the prologue, through ships and men, the Ciconians, the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops' Cave, Keeper of the Winds, Cannibal Beach, and now we're up to Circe, which is also a pretty famous section of the book. So we will be going right into that. So thank you guys for joining me. All right, let's have some fun. Now, after battling the giant cannibals on the islands of the Racing Sun, Ulysses found himself with only 45 men left from his crew of 100. He was determined to bring these men home safely or die himself. They were sailing northward again, and on the third day came in sight of land, low-lying, heavily wooded, with a good sheltering harbor. Although they had met terrible treatment everywhere they had landed since leaving Troy, they were out of food, water was running low, and once again they would have to risk the perils of the land. Ulysses was very cautious. He moored the ship offshore and said to the crew, "I shall go ashore myself, alone, to see what there is to see and make sure there are no terrible hosts, giants, man-eating ogres, or secret sorceries. If I am not back by nightfall, Eurylochus will act as captain. Then he will decide whether to seek food and water here or sail onward. Farewell." He lowered a small boat and rowed toward the island all alone. He beached his skiff and struck inland. The first thing he wanted to do was find out whether he was on an island, on the spur of a mainland, or on the spur of a mainland. He climbed a low hill, then climbed to the top of a tree that grew on that hill. He was high enough now for a clear view, and he turned slowly, remarking the flash of the sea on all sides. He knew that once again they had landed on an island and that the ship was their only means of escape if danger should strike. Something caught his eye. He squinted thoughtfully at what looked like a feather of smoke rising from a grove of trees. The trees were too thick for him to see through. He climbed down and picked his way carefully toward the smoke, trying to make as little noise as possible. He came to a stand of mighty trees, oak trees, thick and tall with glossy leaves. Glimmering through the trees, he saw what looked like a small castle made of a polished gray stone. He did not dare go near, for he had heard strange howling sounds, a pack of dogs, perhaps, but different from any dogs he had ever heard. So he left the grove and made his way back toward the beach, thinking hard, trying to decide whether to sail away immediately or take a chance on the inhabitants being friendly. He did not like the sound of the howling. There was something in it that froze his marrow. He decided that he would not risk his men on the island, but that he would return to the ship, raise anchor, and sail away to seek food elsewhere. Just then, a tall white deer with mighty antlers stepped across his path. The great stag had a bearing proud as a king and did not deign to run, but walked on haughtily, as if he knew no one would dare to attack him. Unfortunately for the stag, however, Ulysses was too hungry to be impressed by any animal's own opinion of himself. The warrior raised his bronze spear and flung it with all the power of his knotted arm. It sang through the air, pierced the stag's body, and nailed him to a tree. The stag died standing up, still in his pride. He was a huge animal, so large that Ulysses feared he could not carry him back to the ship unaided. But then he remembered how hungry his men were, and he decided to try. He picked weeds and wove a rope, which he twisted and twisted again until it was as strong as a ship's line. Then he bound the stag's legs together, swung the great carcass up onto his back, and staggered off, using his spear as a cane. He was at the end of his strength when he reached the beach and let the deer slip to the sand. He signaled to his men, who left the ship moored and came ashore on 5 small boats. They raised a mighty shout of joy when they saw the dead stag. All hands fell to. In a twinkling, the deer was skinned and cut up. Fires were lighted, and the delicious smell of roasting meat drew the gulls to the beach, screaming and dipping, begging for scraps. The men gorged themselves, then lay on the sand to sleep. Ulysses himself kept guard. All that night he stood watch, leaning on his spear, looking at the moon, which hung in the sky like an orange and paled as it climbed. As he watched, he turned things over in his mind, trying to decide what to do. While he was still bothered by the eerie howling of the mysterious animals at the castle, still with his belly full, he felt less gloomy. The more he thought about it, the wiser it seemed to explore the island thoroughly and try to determine whether it was a friendly place or not. For never before had he seen a deer so large. If there was one, there must be more. And with game like that, the ship could be provisioned in a few days. Also, the island was full of streams from which they could fill their dry casks with pure water. Yes, he said to himself, perhaps our luck has changed. Perhaps the god that was playing with us so spitefully has found other amusements. Yes, we will explore this island and see what there is to see. Next morning, he awakened his men and divided them into two groups, one led by himself, the other by Eurylochus. He said to Eurylochus, there is a castle on this island. We must find out who lives there. If he be friendly or not too strong a foe, we will stay here and hunt and lay in water until the hold be full. Then we will depart. Now choose, Eurylochus. Would you rather stay here with your men and guard the ship while I visit the castle, or would you rather I keep the beach? Choose.
Okay, I'm gonna go grab some beer and we'll back.
Oh, Ulysses, Eurylochus said, I am sick of the sight of the sea. Even as my belly hungers for food, so do my eyes hunger for leaves and trees which might recall of our dear Ithaca. And my foot longs to tread something more solid than a deck, a floor that does not pitch and toss and roll. Pray, gentle Ulysses, let me and my men try the castle. Go, said Ulysses, may the gods go with you. So Eurylochus and 22 men set out, while Ulysses guarded the ship. As the band of warriors approached the castle, they too heard a strange howling. Some of them drew their swords, others notched arrows to their bowstrings. They pressed on, preparing to fight. They passed through the grove of oak trees and came to where the trees thinned. Here the howling grew louder and wilder. Then, as they passed the last screen of trees and came to the courtyard of the shining gray castle, they saw an extraordinary sight. A pack of wolves and lions running together like dogs, racing about the courtyard, howling. When they caught sight of the men, the animals turned and flung themselves upon the strangers so swiftly that no man had time to use his weapon. The great beasts stood on their hind legs and put their forepaws on the men's shoulders and fawned on them and licked their faces. They voiced low, muttering, growling whines. Eurylochus, who stood half embracing a huge tawny lion, said, Men, it is most strange, for these fearsome beasts greet us as though we were lost friends. They seem to be trying to speak to us, and look at their eyes. How intelligently they gleam, how sadly they gaze. Not like beasts' eyes at all. It is true, said one of the men, but perhaps there is nothing to fear. Perhaps there is reason to take heart. For if wild beasts are so tame and friendly, then perhaps the master of the castle, whoever he is or whatever he is, will be friendly too and welcome us and give us good cheer. Come, said Eurylochus. When they reached the castle gate, they stopped and listened, for they heard a woman singing in a lovely, deep, full-throated voice, so that without seeing the woman they knew she was beautiful. Eurylochus said, Men, you go into the castle and see what is to be seen. I will stay here and make sure you are not surprised. What do you mean? You come with us. Listen to that. There is no danger where there is such a song. Yes, everything seems peaceful, said Eurylochus. The wild animals are friendly. Instead of the clank of weapons, we hear a woman singing. And it may be peaceful, but something says to me, be careful, take heed. Go you then. I stay on guard. If I'm attacked and you are unharmed, come to my aid. If anything happens to you, then I shall take word back to Ulysses. So Eurylochus stood watch at the castle gate, sword in one hand, dagger in the other, bow slung across his back, and the rest of the men entered the castle. They followed the sound of singing through the rooms and out onto a sunny terrace. There sat a woman weaving. She sat at a huge loom, larger than they had ever seen, and wove a gorgeous tapestry. As she wove, she sang. The bright flax leaped through her fingers as if it were dancing to the music in her voice. The men stood and stared. The sun seemed to be trapped in her hair, so bright it was. She wore it long, falling to her waist. Her dress was as blue as the summer sky, matching her eyes. Her long white arms were bare to the shoulders. She stood up and greeted them. She was very tall. And the men, looking at her and listening to her speak, began to believe that they were in the presence of a goddess. She seemed to read their thoughts too, for she said, No, I am not a goddess, but I am descended from the immortals. I am Circe, granddaughter of Helios, a sun god, who married Perse, daughter of Oceanus. So what am I? Wouldn't it? Seen him? Seen him? Something of both? Or something more? I can do simple magic and prophecy, weave certain homely enchantments, and read dreams. But let us not speak of me, but of you, strangers. You are adventurers, I see, men of the sword, men of the black prowed ships, and hawks of the sea. And you have come through sore, sad times, and seek a haven here on this western isle. So be it. I welcome you. For the sweetest spell Circe weaves is one called hospitality. I will have baths drawn for you, clean garments laid out, and when you are refreshed, you shall come and dine. For I love brave men and the tales they tell. When the men had bathed and changed, Circe gave them each a red bowl, and into each bowl she put yellow food, a kind of porridge made of cheese, barley, honey, and wine, plus a few secret things known only to herself. The odor that rose from the red bowls was more delicious than anything they had ever smelled before, and as each man ate, he felt himself sinking into his hunger, becoming his hunger, lapping, panting, grunting, snuffling. Circe passed among them, smiling, filling the bowls again and again, and the men, waiting for their bowls to be filled, looking about, seeing each other's faces smeared with food, thought, how strange, we're eating like pigs. Even as the thought came, it became more true, for as Circe passed among them now, she touched each one on the shoulder with a wand, saying, glut and swink, eat and drink, gobble food and guzzle wine. Too rude, I think, for humankind, quite right, I think, for swine. As she said these words in her lovely, laughing voice, the men dwindled. Their noses grew wide and long, became snouts. Their hair hardened into bristles. Their hands and feet became hooves. And they ran about on all fours, sobbing and snuffling, searching the floor for bones and crumbs. But all the time they cried real tears from their little red eyes, for they were pigs only in form. Their minds remained unchanged, and they knew what was happening to them. Circe kicked them away from the table. To the sties, she cried. She struck them with her wand, herding them out of the castle into a large sty, and there she flung them acorns and chestnuts and red berries, and watched them grubbing in the mud for the food she threw. She laughed a wild, bright laugh, and went back into the castle. While all this was happening, Eurylochus was waiting at the gate. When the men did not return, he crept up a bow slit in the castle wall and looked in. It was dark now. He saw the glimmer of torchlight and the dim shape of a woman at a loom weaving. He heard a voice singing, the same enchanting voice he had heard before. But of his men he saw nothing, nor did he hear their voices. A great fear seized him. He raced off as fast as he could, hoping against hope that the beasts would not howl. The wolves and lions stood like statues, walked like shadows. Their eyes glittered with cold moonlight, but none of them uttered a sound. He ran until the breath strangled in his throat, until his heart tried to crack out of his ribs, but he kept running, stumbling over roots, slipping on stones. He ran and ran until he reached the beach and fell swooning in Ulysses' arms. Then with his last breath he gasped out the story, told Ulysses of the lions and the wolves, of the woman singing in the castle, and how the men had gone in and not come out. And then he slipped into blackness. Ulysses said to his men, "You hear the story Eurylochus tells. I must go to the castle and see what happened to your companions, but there is no need for you to risk yourselves. You stay here, and if I do not return by sunfall tomorrow, then you must board the ship and sail away, for you will know that I am dead." The men wept and pleaded with him not to go, but he said, "I have sworn an oath that I will never leave another man behind if there is any way I can prevent it. Farewell, dear friends." All right, guys. All right. It was dawn by the time he found himself among the oak trees near the castle. He heard the first faint howling of the animals in the courtyard, and as he walked through the rose and gray light, a figure started up before him, a slender youth in golden breastplates and a golden hat with wings on it, holding a golden staff. Ulysses fell to his knees. "Why do you kneel, venerable sir?" said the youth. "You are older than I and a mighty warrior. You should not kneel." "Pardon," cried Ulysses. "I have sharp eyes for some things. Behind your youth so fair, I see time itself stretching to the beginning of things. Behind your slenderness I sense the power of a god. Sweet youth, beautiful lad, I know you. You are Hermes, the swift one, the messenger god. I pray you have come with good tidings for me, because I fear that I have offended the gods, or one of them anyway, and he has vowed vengeance upon me." It is true, said Hermes. Somebody up there doesn't like you. Can't say who, not ethical, you know. But if you should suspect that he may have something to do with the management of sea matters, well, you're a good guesser, that's all. Poseidon? I have offended Poseidon, muttered Ulysses, the terrible one, the earth shaker. Well, said Hermes, what do you expect? That unpleasant Cyclops, whom you first blinded, then taunted, is Poseidon's son, you know. Not a son to be proud of, but blood is thicker than water, as they say, even in the god of the sea. So Polyphemus tattled to his father and asked him to do dreadful things to you, which I'm afraid he's been doing. Now, this castle you're going to is Circe's, and she's a very dangerous person to meet. A sorceress, a doer of magical mischief. And she is waiting for you, Ulysses. She sits at her loom weaving and waiting for you. She has already entertained your shipmates, fed them, watched them make pigs of themselves, and finally she helped them on their way a bit. In brief, they are now in a sty being fattened, and one day they will make a most excellent meal for someone not too fussy. Among Circe's guests are many peculiar feeders. Thunder and lightning, cried Ulysses. What can I do? Listen and learn, said Hermes. I have come to help you. Poseidon's wrath does not mean all of us, you know. We gods have our moods, and they're not always kind, but somehow or other we must keep things balanced. And so I have come to help you. You must do exactly as I say, or nothing can help you. Now listen closely. First, take this. He snapped his fingers, and a flower appeared between them. It was white and heavily scented with a black and yellow root. He gave it to Ulysses. It is called moly. He said, it is magical. So long as you carry it, Circe's drugs will not work. You will go to the castle. She will greet you and feed you. You will eat the food which, to her amazement, will leave you unharmed. Then you will draw your sword and advance upon her as though you meant to kill her. Then she will see that you have certain powers and will begin to plead with you. She will unveil enchantments more powerful than any she has yet used. Resist them. You cannot, nor can any man, nor any god, nor is there any counterspell that will work against such beauty. But if you wish to see your home again, if you wish to rescue your shipmates from the sty, you must resist her long enough to make her swear the great oath of the immortals, that she will not do you any harm as long as you are her guest. That is all I can do for you. From now on, it is up to you. We shall be watching you with interest. Farewell. The golden youth disappeared, just as a ray of sunlight does when a cloud crosses the face of the sun. Ulysses shook his head, wondering whether he had really seen the god or imagined him. But then he saw that he was still holding the curious flower, and he knew that Hermes had indeed been there. So he marched on toward the castle through the pack of lions and wolves who leapt about him, fawning, looking at him with their great intelligent eyes and trying to warn him in their snarling, growling voices. He stroked their heads, passed among them, and went into the castle. And here he found Circe sitting at her loom, weaving and singing. She wore a white tunic now, and a flame-colored scarf, and was as beautiful as the dawn. She stood up and greeted him, saying, Welcome, stranger. I live here alone, and seldom see anyone, and almost never have guests. So you are triply welcome, great sea-stained warrior, for I know that you have seen battle and adventure and have tales to tell. She drew him a warm, perfumed bath, and her servants bathed and anointed him, and gave him clean garments to wear. When he came to her, she gave him a red bowl full of yellow food, and said, Eat. The food smelled delicious. Its fragrance was intoxicating. Ulysses felt that he wanted to plunge his face into it and grub it up like a pig, but he held the flower tightly, kept control of himself, and ate slowly. He did not quite finish the food. Delicious, he said. Your own recipe? Yes, she said. Will you not finish? I'm not quite as hungry as I thought. Then drink. Here's wine. She turned her back to him as she poured the wine, and he knew that she was casting a powder in it. He smiled to himself and drank off the wine, then said, Delicious. Your own grapes? You look weary, stranger, she said. Sit and talk with me. Gladly, said Ulysses. We have much to speak of, you and I. I'm something of a farmer myself. I breed cattle on my own little island of Ithaca where I'm king, when I'm home. Won't you show me your livestock? Livestock? I keep no cattle here. Oh, do you not? I fancy I heard pigs squealing out there. Must have been mistaken. Yes, said Circe, badly mistaken. But you do have interesting animals. I was much struck by the wolves and lions, who course in a pack like dogs. Very friendly for such savage beasts. have taught them to be friendly, said Circe. I am friendly myself, you see, and I like all the members of my household to share my goodwill. Their eyes, said Ulysses. I was struck by their eyes, so big and sad and clever. You know, as I think of it, they looked like human eyes. Did they? Said Circe. Well, the eyes go last. She came to him swiftly, raised her wand, touched him on the shoulder, and said, Change, change, change. Turn, turn, turn. Nothing happened. Her eyes widened when she saw him sitting there unchanged, sniffing at the flower he had taken from his tunic. He took the wand from her gently and snapped it in two. Then, drawing his sword, he seized her by her long golden hair and forced her to her knees, pulling her head until her white throat was offered the blade of the sword. Then he said, You have not asked me my name. It is Ulysses. I am an unlucky man, but not altogether helpless. You have changed my men into pigs, now I will change you into a corpse. She did not flinch before the blade. Her great blue eyes looked into his. She took the sharp blade in her hand, stroked it gently, and said, It is almost worth dying to be overcome by such a mighty warrior, but I think living might be interesting too, now that I have met you. He felt her fingers burning the cold metal of the sword as if the blade had become part of his body. He tried to turn his head, but sank deeper into the blueness of her eyes. Yes, I am a sorceress, she murmured, a wicked woman. But you are a sorcerer too, are you not? Changed me more than I have changed your men, for I have changed only their bodies, and you have changed my soul. It is no longer a wicked, plotting soul, but soft and tender and womanly, full of love for you. Her voice throbbed. She stroked the sword blade. He raised her to her feet and said, You are beautiful enough to turn any man into an animal. I will love you. But even before I am a man, I am a leader. My men are my responsibility. Before we can love each other, I must ask you to swear the great oath that you will not harm me while I am defenseless, that you will not wound me and suck away my blood as witches do, but will treat me honestly, and that first of all you will restore my men to their own forms and let me take them with me when I am ready to leave. I will try to see that you are never ready, said Circe softly. Circe kept her promise. The next morning, she took Ulysses out to the sty and called the pigs. They came trotting up, snuffing and grunting. As they streamed past her, rushing to Ulysses, she touched each one on the shoulder with her wand. As she did so, each pig stood up, his hind legs grew longer, his front hoofs became hands, his eyes grew, his nose shrank, his quills softened into hair, and he was his human self once more, only taller and younger. The men crowded around Ulysses, shouting and laughing. He said to them, Welcome, my friends. You have gone a short but ugly voyage to the animal state, and while you have returned looking very well, it is clear that we are in a place of sorceries and must conduct ourselves with great care. Our enchanting hostess, Circe, has become so fond of our company that she insists we stay a while. This indeed is the price of your release from hogdom. You will now go down to your shipmates on the beach and tell them what has happened. Ask them to secure the ship, and then return here with you to the castle. It is another delay in our journey, but it is far better than what might have been. Go then. The men trooped happily down to the harbor and told the others what happened. At first, Eurylochus protested. How do I know, he said, that you are not still under enchantment? How do I know that this is not some new trick of the sorceress to get us all into her power, turn us all into pigs, and keep us in the sty forever? But the other men paid no heed to his warnings. They were eager to see the castle and the beautiful witch, to taste her delicious food, and enjoy all the luxuries their friends had described. So they obeyed Ulysses' command. They dragged the ship up onto the beach, beyond reach of the tide, unstepped its mast, then marched off laughing and singing toward the castle, carrying mast and oars and folded sail. Eurylochus followed, but he was afraid. For some time things went well. Ulysses and Circe lived as husband and wife. The men were treated as welcome guests. They feasted for hours each night in the great dining hall. And as they ate, they were entertained by minstrel singing, by acrobats, dancing bears, and dancing girls. During the day, they swam in the ocean, hunted wild boar, threw the discus, had archery and spear-throwing contests, raced, jumped, and wrestled. Then, as dusk drew in, they returned to the castle for their warm, perfumed baths and bowls of hot wine before the feasting began again. As for Ulysses, he found himself falling deeper under Circe's spell every day. Thoughts of home were dim now. He barely remembered his wife's face. Sometimes he would think of days gone by and wonder when he could shake off this enchantment and resume his voyage. Then she would look at him, and her eyes, like blue flame, burned these pictures out of his head. Then he could not rest until he was within the scent of her hair, the touch of her hand, and he would whimper impatiently like a dog dreaming, shake his head, and go to her. "It is most curious," she said, "but I love you more than all my other husbands." "In the name of heaven, how many have you had?" he cried. "Ah, don't say it like that. Not so many, when you consider. I have been a frequent widow, it is true, but please understand. I am God descended on both sides. I am immortal and cannot die. I have lived since the beginning of things." "Yes." "How many husbands have you had?" "Please, my dear, be fair. Gods have loved me, and satyrs and fauns and centaurs and other creatures who do not die, but I have always had a taste for humankind. My favorite husbands have been men, human men. They, you see, grow old so quickly, and I am alone again, and time grows heavy and breeds mischief." "How many husbands have you buried, dear widow?" "Buried? Why, none." "I see. You cremate them." "I do not let them die. I cannot bear dead things, especially if they were things I have loved. Of all nature's transformations, death seems to me the most stupid. No, I do not let them die. I change them into animals, and they roam this beautiful island forevermore, and I see them every day and feed them with my own hand. That explains those wolves and lions in the courtyard, I suppose. Ah, they are only the best, the cream, the mightiest warriors of ages gone. But I have had lesser husbands. They are now rabbits, squirrels, boars, cats, spiders, frogs, and monkeys. That little fellow there," she pointed to a silvery little ape who was prancing and gibbering on top of the bedpost. "He who pelts you with the walnut shell every night. He was very jealous, very busy and jealous, and still is. I picked their forms, you see, to match their dispositions. Is it not thoughtful of me?" "Tell me," said Ulysses, "when I am used up, will I be good enough to join your select band of wolves and lions? Or will I be something less? A toad, perhaps, or a snail?" "A fox, undoubtedly," she said. "With your swiftness and your cunning ways? Oh, yes, a fox. A king of foxes." She stroked his beard. "But you are the only man who ever withstood my spells. You are my conqueror, a unique hero. It is not your fate to stay with me. It is not my happy fate to arrange your last hours." "Is it not?" said Ulysses. "No," she said, "unless you can wipe out of your mind all thoughts of home, unless you can erase all dreams of battle and voyage, unless you can forget your men and release me from my oath and let them become animals, contented animals, then and then only can you remain with me as husband forever." Out. Out.
Right.
Hold on, guys. "Then and only then can you remain with me as a husband forever, and I will give you of my immortality. Yes, that can be arranged. I know how. You will share my immortality and live days of sport and idleness and nights of love, and we will live together always, knowing no other, and we will never grow old." "Can such a thing be?" "Yes, but the decision is yours. I have sworn an oath and cannot keep you against your will. If you choose, you can remain here with me and make this island a paradise of pleasure. If not, you must resume your voyage and encounter dangers more dreadful than you have seen yet. You will watch friends dying before your eyes, have your own life imperiled 100 times, be battered, bruised, torn, wave-tossed, all of this if you leave me. But it is for you to decide." Ulysses stood up and strode to the edge of the terrace. From where he stood, he could see the light dancing in a million hot little needles on the blue water. In the courtyard, he saw the wolves and the lions. Beyond the courtyard, at the edge of the wood, he saw his men, happy-looking, healthy, tanned. Some were wrestling, some flinging spears, others drawing the bow. Circe had crossed to her loom and was weaving and singing. He remembered his wife. She also, at home in Ithaca, would sit and weave. But how different she looked. Her hair had no fleece of burning gold, but black. She was much smaller than Circe, and she did not sing. "I have decided," he said. "I must go." "Must you?" "Yes. First, let me tell you what the gods have decreed. If you sail away from this island, you cannot head for home. First, you must go to the land of the dead." "The land of the dead?" cried Ulysses. "No, no, it cannot be." "To the land of the dead, to Tartarus. This is the decree. You must go there with all your men, and there you must consult certain ghosts of whom you will be told, and they will prophesy for you and plan your homeward journey. and theirs is the route you must follow if you wish to see Ithaca again. The land of the dead? Dark Tartarus? The realm of torment from which no mortal returns? I must go there? Unless you stay here with me, in peace, in luxury, in every pleasure but that of adventure. It cannot be, said Ulysses. As you, beautiful sorceress, chose a form for your lovers that matches their natures, and which they must wear when they are no longer men, so the fates, with their shears, have cut out my destiny. It is danger, toil, battle, uncertainty. And though I stop and refresh myself now and again, still I must resume my voyage, for that is my nature. And to fit my nature has fate cut the pattern of my days. Go quickly, said Circe. Call your men and depart, for if you stay here any longer, I shall forget my duty. I shall break my oath and keep you here by force and never let you go. Quickly then, brave one, quickly. Ulysses summoned his men and led them down to the beach. They stepped to the mast, rigged the sails, and sailed away. They caught a northwest puff. The sails filled and the black ship ran out of the harbor. Ulysses' face was wet with Circe's last tears, and his heart was very heavy. But then spray dashed into his face, and with the old remembered bright shock, and he laughed. The last sound the men heard as the ship threaded through the mouth of the harbor and ran for the open sea was the howling of the lions and wolves who had followed them down to the beach. They stood now, breast deep in the surf, gazing after the white sail, crying their loneliness. All right, that was the chapter about Circe. I had somebody ask me if I was an English teacher, and no, I'm not. I did go to college for a teaching degree, but I didn't finish that. I finished my theater degree instead. So that's what I do. I'm glad that you like it, though. That makes me pretty happy. I'm excited to do this, so it's really just for me. I also spent quite a few years in daycare, so I've been teaching little guys, infants mostly, so under 1. That's kind of my specialty. So this is not really for them, but it is fun. I do enjoy it, so I'm glad you do too. All right, let's go into the land of the dead. In those days, men knew that the ocean stream was a huge river girdling the earth. Hades' kingdom, dark Tartarus, was presumed to be on the farther shore, over the edge of the visible world, but no one could be certain, for those who went there did not return. Now it had been foretold by Circe that Ulysses would have to visit the land of the dead and be advised by wise ghosts before he could resume his journey and find his way back to Ithaca. So he turned his bow westward, and a strong east wind caught his white sail and sent the ship skimming through toward waters no ship had sailed before. Night tumbled from the sky and set its blackness on the sea and would not lift. The ship sailed blindly. The men were clamped in a nameless grief. They could hardly bear the sound of their own voices, but spoke to each other in whispers. The night wore on and did not give way to dawn. There were no stars, no moon. They sailed westward and waited for dawn, but no crack of light appeared in the sky. The darkness would not lift. Once again, Ulysses lashed himself to the tiller and stuck splinters of wood in his eye sockets to prop the weary lids. And finally, after a week of night, a feeble light did curdle the sky. Not a regular dawn, no joyous burst of sun, but a grudging, milky grayness that floated down and thickened into fog. Still, Ulysses did not dare to sleep, for day was no better than night. No man could see in the dense woolly folds of fog. Still the east wind blew, pushing them westward through the curdling mist, and still Ulysses did not dare give over the helm, for he had heard that the westward rim of the world was always fog-girt, and was studded by murderously rocky islets, where dwelt the Cimmerians, who waited quietly in the fog for ships to crack upon their shores and deliver to them their natural food, shipwreck sailors. Finally, Ulysses knew he could not keep awake any longer, yet he knew too that to give over the helm to anyone else meant almost certain death for all of them. So he sent a sailor named Elpenor to climb the mast and try to see some distance ahead. No sooner had Elpenor reached the top of the mast than the ship yawned sharply. Ulysses lost his footing and stumbled against the mast. No one saw Elpenor fall. The fog was too thick, but they heard his terrible scream turned into a choking gurgle, and they knew that he had been shaken from the mast and had fallen into the sea and been drowned. No sooner had his voice gone still than the fog thinned. They could see from one end of the ship to the other, the wet sails, the shiny spar, each other's wasted faces. A white gull rose screaming and flew ahead of them. "Follow that gull," said Ulysses. "He will lead us to where we must go." Then he stretched himself on the deck and went to sleep, whereupon the crew began to whisper among themselves that the gull was the spirit of their shipmate Elpenor, and that Ulysses had shaken him from the mast purposely, as one shakes fruit from a tree, so that he might fall in the water and be drowned, giving them the white flight of his spirit to follow to Tartarus. "He has murdered our shipmate," they whispered to each other, "as he will murder us all to gain his ends." But they did not dare say it loud enough to awaken Ulysses. All day they sailed, following the white flash of the gull, and when night came, there were no stars and no moon, nothing but choking blackness. Ulysses took the helm again, and now the bow tipped forward, and the stern rose, and the ship slipped through the water with a rushing, rustling speed as if it was sailing downhill. The men clung to their shrouds and wept, groaned, and pleaded with Ulysses to change course, but he answered them not at all. He planted his feet and gripped the tiller with all of his strength as the deck tilted and the ship slipped down, down. "Who has ever heard of the sea sloping?" he said to himself. "Truly this must be the waterway to the underworld, and we are the first keel to cut these fathoms. May the gods grant we cross them again, going the other way." There was a roaring of waters. The deck leveled. They sailed out of darkness as through a curtain and found themselves in a strange place. The sea had narrowed to a river. The water was black, and the sky was black, curving downward like the inside of a bowl. The light was gray. Tall trees grew along the bank of the river, black poplars and white birches, and Ulysses knew that the black river was the Styx, and that he had sailed his ship into the kingdom of the dead. There was no wind, but the sails remained strangely taut, and the ship floated easily into harbor, as if some invisible hand had taken the helm. Ulysses bade his men disembark. He led them past a fringe of trees to a great meadow where black goats cropped black grass. He drew his sword and scraped out a shallow trench, then had his men cut the throats of 2 black goats and hold them over the trench until it had filled with blood. For it was ghosts he had come to counsel with, and ghosts he knew came only where they could find fresh blood to drink, hoping always to fill their dry veins. Sorry, I need to take a drink. 2 seconds. Alright. The meadow was still. No birds sang. There was no shrill of insects. The goats did not bleat. The men were too frightened to breathe. Ulysses waited, leaning on his sword, gloomily watching the trench of blood. Then he heard a rustling, and saw the air thickened into sprouts of steam. Steamy shapes separated, heads and shoulders of mist leaning over the trench to drink, growing more solid as they drank. One raised its head and looked at him. He shuddered. It was his mother, and I'm going to murder this name, I'm sorry. Anticlea? Anticlea. I bet you that's it. That sounds right. Anticlea. "Greetings, mother. How do you fare?" "Poorly, son. I'm dead. I kept telling you I would die one day, but you never believed me. Now you see." "What do you see? Say you see." A thin tittering arose from the ghosts, and they spoke in steamy whispers. "What are you doing here, man? You're still alive. Go and die properly and come back, and we will welcome you." "Silence!" cried Ulysses. "I come for better counsel than this. I must find my way back to Ithaca, past the mighty wrath of a god who reaches his strong hand and swirls the sea as a child does a mud puddle, dashing my poor twig of a ship from peril to grim peril. I need good counsel to get home. Where is the sage? Tiresias. Why is he not here to greet me?" Coming. He is blind, but he smells blood as far as any. Do not drink it all. Save some for him." And Ulysses smote the ghosts with his sword, driving them back, whimpering, from the trench of blood. But then, striding across the meadow, came certain ghosts in armor. Ulysses Ulysses bowed low. Welcome, O fox of war, cried the ghost of Achilles. Tell me, do men remember me in Arcadia? The gods have not allowed me to set foot upon our dear islands, said Ulysses. But on whichever savage shore I am thrown, there are those who know the name of great Achilles. Your fame outshines all warriors who have ever handled weapons, and your son, Neoptolemus, Neoptolemus is a hero too. We're gonna go with that. I always say that. Thank you, Ulysses, said the ghost of Achilles. Your words are fair and courteous as always. Now, heed this. When you leave this place, you will sail past an island where you will hear the voices of maidens singing. And the sound of their singing will be sweeter than memories of home. And when your men hear them, their wits will be scattered, and they will wish to dive overboard and swim to shore. If they do, they will perish. For these maidens are a band of witch sisters, music-mad sisters, who lure sailors to the rocks so that they may flay them and make drums of their skins and flutes of their bones. They are the Siren sisters. When you pass their shore, steer clear, steer clear. Thank you, great Achilles. Next to Achilles stood a huge ghost staring at Ulysses out of empty eye sockets. He was a giant skeleton. He wore a cloak of stiffened blood and a red plume upon his skull. His spear and sword were made of bone too. He was Ajax. You tricked me, Ulysses, he said. When great Achilles here fell on the battlefield, you claimed his golden armor by craft, when I have had it. When I should have had it. You took the golden armor that my heart desired and drove me mad with rage, so that I butchered cattle and captives and then killed myself. I hate you, sly one, and I have bad news for you. If you ever do reach Ithaca, you will find your wife being courted by other men, your son a captive in your own castle, your substance devoured. This is my word to you, Ulysses. So you had simply better fall on your sword now where you stand and save another trip to Hades. Thank you, great Ajax, said Ulysses. I will remember what you have told me. I knew that Penelope was being wooed by other men in your absence, said Ulysses' mother. I knew it well, but I would not speak evil of your wife. Not I, not I. Thank you, mother, said Ulysses. Then came a ghost so new that its flesh had not quite turned to mist, but quivered on his bones like a pale jelly. He was Elpenor, who had fallen from the mast and had led them to Tartarus. When Ulysses saw who it was, he was taken by a great dread and cried, I did not push you, Elpenor. You fell. It was an accident, I swear. Nevertheless, said Elpenor, my ghost will trouble you until you make my grave. How will I do that? The first land you come to, build me a barrow and set thereon my oar. If you forget, I shall scratch at your windows and howl down your chimney and dance in your sleep. I will build your grave with my own hands, said Ulysses. Have you any counsel for me? Yes. Death has cleared my eyes, and I see things I would not have known. I see your ship now sailing in a narrow place between two huge rocks. Beneath the starboard rock is a cave, and in that cave squats Scylla, an unpleasant lady with 12 legs and 6 heads, who cries with the voice of a newborn puppy. If you sail too near that rock, she will seize 6 sailors to feed her 6 mouths. Then I will steer away from Scylla toward the other rock. But under the other rock lurks a strange, thirsty monster named Charybdis, whose habit it is to drink up a whole tide of water in one gulp and then spit it out again, making a whirlpool with such terrible sucking force that any ship within its swirl would be destroyed. Monster to the right and monster to the left, cried Ulysses. What can I do then? You must keep to the middle way. But if you cannot, and indeed it will be very difficult for you will be tackling against headwinds, then choose the right-hand rock where hungry Scylla squats, for it is better to lose 6 men than your ship and your entire crew. Thank you, courteous Elpenor. I will heed your words, said Ulysses. Then the air grew vaporous as the mob of ghosts shifted and swayed, making way for one who cleaved forward toward the trench of blood, and Ulysses recognized the one he was most eager to see, the blind woman-shaped ghost of Tiresias, sage of Thebes, expert at disasters, master of prophecy. Hail, venerable Tiresias, he cried. All honor to you. I have journeyed far to make your acquaintance. Tiresias came silently to the trench, knelt and drank. He drank until the trench was empty and the misty bladder of his body was faintly pink. You honor me by your visit, Ulysses, he said. Many men sought my counsel when I was alive, but you are the first client to make his way down here. You have heard these others tell you of certain petty dangers that you will do well to avoid, but I have a mighty thing to tell. Tell. Your next landfall will be a large island that men shall one day call Sicily. Here the sun titan Hyperion pastures his herd of golden cattle. Your stores will have been eaten when you reach this place, and your men will be savage with hunger. But no matter how desperate for food they are, you must prevent them from stealing even one beef. If they do, they shall never see home again. I myself will guard the herds of the Sun Titan, said Ulysses, and not one beef shall be taken. Thank you, wise Tiresias. Go now, take your men aboard the ship and go. Sail up the Black River toward the upper air. But now that I am here and have come such a long and weary way to get here, may I not see some of the famous sights? May I not see Orion hunting, Minos judging? May I not dance with the heroes in the fields of Asphodel? May I not see Tantalus thirsting, or my own grandfather, Sisyphus, rolling his eternal stone up the hill? No, said Tiresias. It is better that you go. You have been here too long already, I fear. Too long exposed to the bone-bleached airs. You may already be tainted with death, you and your men, making your fates too heavy for any ship to hold. Embark then. Sail up the Black River. Do not look back. Remember our advice and forget our reproaches. Do not return until you are properly dead. Ulysses ordered his men aboard. He put down the helm. There was still no wind, but the sails stretched taut and the ship pushed upriver. Heeding the last words of the old sage, he did not look back, but he heard the voice of his mother calling, "Goodbye, goodbye," until it grew faint as his own breath. All right, made it through Tartarus, the land of the dead. I really like the picture at the beginning of this chapter, by the way. It looks like Hades. I like it. This next chapter is called The Wandering Rocks. I guess I should be showing you guys these pictures, I guess, if you wanted to see them. But it's pretty cool to... There's even a picture anyway. So, I'm going to take another quick drink now that we're at the end of a chapter. So... All right. Oh, here, hold on one second, too. I don't know if you guys can hear, but my husband's out in the other room making beer. Alright, anyway. I just cried out, "Oh no," so I know it's going well. Alright, The Wandering Rocks. Where are we at? Okay. They sailed out of darkness into light, and their hearts danced with joy to see blue water and blue sky again. A fair west wind plumped their sails and sped them toward home. If this wind keeps blowing, said Ulysses to himself, perhaps we can skirt the dangerous islands they spoke of. Sail right around these sirens and these tide-drinking and man-eating monsters and find our way home without further mishap. True, it was foretold differently, but what of that? How reliable are such prophecies after all? Ajax and Achilles were always better at fighting than thinking. Why should they be any wiser when they're dead than alive? And Elpenor, my most inept hand, must I take his word for what is going to happen? Why, that fall from the mast must have scattered the few wits he had. Besides, they were all ghosts down there advising me, and ghosts are gloomy by nature, as everyone knows. They like to frighten people. It's the way they've been trained. No, by the gods, I will not accept all these evils as inevitable, but will stretch my sails to the following wind and speed for Ithaca. At that very moment, he heard a strange sound, not a sound the wind makes, nor the water, nor the voice of man or gull. He looked about, searched sky and water, he saw nothing. Then he turned over the helm to one of the sailors and climbed the mast. There he could see for miles over the dancing water. Far to the south he saw tiny black things floating, so small he could not tell whether he was imagining them or not. But they grew larger even as he watched, and as they came near, the strange moaning, grinding sound grew louder and louder. What are they? He said to himself. They look like rocks, but rocks don't float. Can they be dolphins? Not whales, surely whales spout, and all fish are voiceless. What is it, then, that comes and cries upon the silence of the seas? Another evil spawn by the stubborn god who pursues me? But what? By now the objects were close enough to see, and he saw that they were indeed rocks, a floating reef of rocks, jagged boulders bobbing on the waves like corks, rubbing against each other and making that moaning, grinding sound, and coming fast, driving purposefully toward the ship. "Port the helm!" roared Ulysses. The ship swung northward as the rocks pressed from the south. "Floating rocks," said Ulysses. "Who has seen their like? This is a wonder unreported by any traveler. We see a new thing today, and I should like to see the last of it. Are they following us? Are they driven by some intelligence? Or are we caught in a trick of tide that moves them so? I shall soon see." He took the helm himself then and sailed the ship in a circle to give the rocks a chance to pass by. But to his horror, he saw the rocks begin to circle also, keeping always between him and the open sea to the south. They held the same distance now. He sheered off northward. They followed, keeping the same distance. But when he turned and headed south, they held their place. He saw them loom before his bow, jagged and towering, ready to crush his hull like a walnut. And he had to swing off again and dart away northward, as his crew raised a shout of terror. So he set his course north by northwest, thinking sadly, "I see that I can avoid nothing that was foretold. I cannot bear southward around the Isle of the Sun, where lurk the demons and monsters I have been warned about, but must speed toward them as swiftly as toward a rendezvous with loved ones. These rocks shepherd me." They herd this vessel as a stray sheep is herded by the sheepdog's dog, herded by the shepherd's dog, driving me toward that which the vengeful gods have ordained. So be it then. If I cannot flee, then I must dare. Heroes are made, I see, when retreat is cut off. So be it. He set his course for the Isle of the Sun Titan, which men called Thrinacia, and which we know now as Sicily. All through the night they sailed. In the darkness they lost sight of the rocks, but they could hear them clashing and moaning, keeping pace with the ship. Now we're on to the Sirens. If you have seen the movie, what is it? Now I lost the name of it. Completely lost the name of the movie now. Anyway, George Clooney, that movie, The Sirens. Like, that's the most obvious connection I see to this book. Most of the movie has very strong connections to this book, but the Sirens are like the obvious one, right? All right. A Man of Constant Sorrow. What's the name of that movie? It's gonna bother me. I can't remember. I'll think of it later, I'm sure. All right. In the first light of morning, Ulysses awoke and called his crew about him. "Men," he said, "listen well, for your lives today hang upon what I am about to tell you. That large island to the west is Thrinacia, where we must make a landfall, for our provisions run low. But to get to the island, we must pass through a narrow strait, and at the head of this strait is a rocky islet where dwell two sisters called Sirens, whose voices you must not hear. Now I will guard you against their singing, which would lure you to shipwreck. But first you must bind me to the mast, tie me tightly, as though I were a dangerous captive, and no matter how I struggle, no matter what signals I make to you, do not release me, lest I follow their voices to destruction, taking you with me." Thereupon Ulysses took a large lump of beeswax that had been used by the sailmender to slick his heavy thread and kneaded it into his powerful hands until it became soft. Then he went to each man of the crew and plugged his ears with soft wax. He caulked their ears so tightly so that they could hear nothing but the thin pulsing of their own blood. Then he stood himself against the mast, and the men bound him about with rawhide, winding it tightly around his body, lashing him to the thick mast. They had lowered the sails because ships cannot sail through a narrow strait unless there is a following wind, and now each man of the crew took his place at the great oars. The polished blades whipped the sea into a froth of white water, and the ship nosed toward the strait. Ulysses had left his own ears unplugged because he had to remain in command of the ship and had need of his hearing. Every sound means something upon the sea, but when they drew near the rocky islet and heard the first faint strains of the Sirens singing, then he wished he too had stopped his own ears with wax. All his strength suddenly surged toward the sound of those magical voices. The very hair of his head seemed to be tugging at his scalp, trying to fly away. His eyeballs started out of his head. For in those voices were the sounds that men love. Happy sounds like bird railing, sleet hailing, milk paling. Sad sounds like rain leaking, tree creaking, wind seeking. Autumn sounds like leaf tapping, fire snapping, river lapping. Quiet sounds like snow flaking, spider waking, heart breaking. It seemed to him that the sun was burning him to a cinder as he stood, and the voices of the Sirens purled in a cool crystal pool upon their rock past the blue hot flatness of the sea and its lacings of white hot spume. It seemed to him he could actually see their voices deepening into a silvery cool pool, and must plunge into that pool or die a flaming death. He was filled with such a fury of desire that he swelled his mighty muscles, burst the rawhide bonds like thread, and dashed for the rail. But he had warned two of his strongest men, Perimedes and Eurylochus, to guard him close. They seized him before he could plunge into the water. He swept them aside as if they were children. But they had held him long enough to give the crew time to swarm around him. He was overpowered, crushed by their numbers, and dragged back to the mast. This time he was bound with the mighty hawser that held the anchor. The men returned to their rowing seats, unable to hear the voices because of the wax corking their ears. The ship swung about and headed for the strait again. Louder now and clearer the tormenting voices came to Ulysses. Again he was aflame with a fury of desire, but try as he might, he could not break the thick anchor line. He strained against it until he bled, but the line held. The men bent to their oars and rowed more swiftly, for they saw the mast bending like a tall tree in a heavy wind, and they feared Ulysses in his fury might snap it off short and dive, mast and all, into the water to get at the Sirens. Now they were passing the rock, and Ulysses could see the singers. There were two of them. They sat on a heap of white bones, the bones of shipwreck sailors, and sang more beautifully than senses could bear. But their appearance did not match their voices, for they were shaped like birds, huge birds larger than eagles. They had feathers instead of hair, and their hands and feet were claws, but their faces were the faces of young girls. When Ulysses saw them, he was able to forget the sweetness of their voices because their look was so fearsome. He closed his eyes against the terrible sight of these bird women perched on their heap of bones. But when he closed his eyes and could not see their ugliness, then their voices maddened him once again, and he felt himself straining against the bloody ropes. He forced himself to open his eyes and look upon the monsters, so that the terror of their bodies would blot out the beauty of their voices. But the men, who could only see, not hear the Sirens, were so appalled by their aspect that they swept their oars faster and faster, and the black ship scuttled past the rock. The Sirens' voices sounded fainter and fainter, and finally died away. When Perimedes and Eurylochus saw their captain's face lose its madness, they unbound him, and he signaled to the men to unstop their ears. For now he heard the whistling gurgle of a whirlpool, and he knew that they were approaching the narrowest part of the strait, and must pass between Scylla and Charybdis. I might be saying those wrong, and if I am, please let me know. Somebody. Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis? Close enough, I think. I am going to take a quick break. I'll pause my recorded video here, so that you guys don't have to sit and wait for me, but I will be right back. Oh, brother, where art thou? It's the name of the movie, by the way, that I couldn't think of. All right. Ulysses had been told in Tartarus of these two monsters that guard the narrow waterway leading to Thrinacia. Each of them hid beneath its own huge rock, which stood side by side and were separated only by the width of the strait at its narrowest point. Charybdis dwelt in a cave beneath the left-hand rock. Once she had been a superbly beautiful naiad, daughter of Poseidon, and very loyal to her father in his endless feud with Zeus, lord of earth and sky. It was who rode the hungry tides after Poseidon had stirred up a storm and led them onto the beaches, gobbling up those villages, submerging fields, drowning forests, claiming them for the sea. She won so much land for her father's kingdom that Zeus became enraged and changed her into a monster, a huge bladder of a creature whose face was all mouth and whose arms and legs were flippers. And he penned her in the cave beneath the rock, saying, "Your hunger shall become thirst. As you once devoured land belonging to me, now you shall drink the tide thrice a day, swallow it, and spit it forth again, and your name will be a curse to sailors forever." And so it was. Thrice a day she burned with a terrible thirst, and stuck her head out of the cave and drank down the sea, shrieking the waters into a shallow stream, and then spat the water out again in a tremendous torrent, making a whirlpool near her rock in which no ship could live. This was Charybdis. As for Scylla, who lived under the right-hand rock, she too had once been a beautiful naiad. Poseidon himself spied her swimming one day and fell in love with her, and so provoked the jealousy of his wife, Amphitrite, that she cried, "I will make her the most hideous female that man or god ever fled from." Thereupon, she changed Scylla into something that looked like a huge, fleshy spider with 12 legs and 6 heads. She also implanted in her an insatiable hunger, a wild greed for human flesh. When any ship came within reach of her long tentacles, she would sweep the deck of sailors and eat them. Ulysses stood in the bow of the ship, nose slowly up the strait. The roaring of the waters grew louder and louder, and now he saw wild feathers of spume flying as Charybdis sucked down the tide and spat it back. He looked at the other rock. Scylla was not in sight, but he knew she was lurking underneath, ready to spring. He squinted, trying to measure distances. The only chance to come through unharmed, he saw, was to strike the middle way between the two rocks, just beyond the section of the whirlpool and just out of Scylla's reach. But to do this meant that the ship must not be allowed to swerve a foot from its exact course, for the middle way was no wider than the ship itself. He took the helm and bade his men keep a perfectly regular stroke. Then, considering further, he turned the helm over to Eurylochus and put on his armor. Grasping sword and spear, he posted himself at the starboard rail. "For," he said to himself, "there is no contending with the whirlpool. If we veer off our course, it must be toward the other monster. I can fight an enemy I can see." The men rowed very carefully, very skillfully. Eurylochus chanted the stroke, and the black ship cut through the waters of the strait, keeping exactly to the middle way. They were passing between the rocks now. They watched in amazement as the water fell away to their left, showing a shuddering flash of seabed and gasping fish, and then roared back again with such force that the water was beaten into white froth. They felt their ship tremble. "Well done," said Ulysses. "A few more strokes and we are through. Keep the way, the middle way." But when measuring distance, he had been unable to reckon upon one thing. The ship was being rowed, and the great sweep oars projected far beyond the width of the hull, and Scylla, lurking underwater, seized 2 of the oars and dragged the ship toward her. Dumbfounded, Ulysses saw the polished shafts of the oars, which had been dipping and flashing so regularly, suddenly snap like twigs. Before he knew what was happening, the deck tilted violently. He was thrown against the rail and almost fell overboard. He lay on the deck, scrambling for his sword. He saw tentacles arching over him. They were like the arms of an octopus, but ended in enormous human hands. He found his sword, rose to his knees, and hacked at the tentacles. Too late. The hands had grasped 6 sailors, snatched them screaming through the air and into the sea. Ulysses had no time for fear. He had to do a number of things immediately. He roared to the crew to keep the ship on course lest it be swept into the whirlpool. Then he seized an oar himself and rowed on the starboard side where the oars had been broken. From where he sat, he could see Scylla's rock, could see her squatting at the door of her cave. He saw her plainly, stuffing the men into her 6 bloody mouths. He heard the shrieks of his men as they felt themselves being eaten alive. He did not have time to weep, for he had to keep his crew rowing and tell the helmsman how to steer past the whirlpool. They passed through the strait into open water. Full ahead lay Thrinacia, with its wooden hills and long white beaches. The Isle of the Sun Titan was their next landfall. Oof. Guys, we're making our way through this book. It's super exciting. All right. Oh, I forgot I was going to show you the picture. Picture. And then here's the one for the cattle of the sun, which is our next one. But I was going to also show you this to see where we were at here. So we are right here right now. They just went through that little pass there, and now they're going to come right down here to Syracuse, Sicily. They're going towards Sicily. So we have made quite a ways here. So they started here and came all the way around, and we've done. Whoop, sorry, it's backwards for me. Here, and then they went there, and then I can't do this backwards. Sorry, guys. Anyway, we already did all of this over here. So there we go. Now we're down here in Sicily. All right. You saw me struggle. That was a real struggle, guys. Serious struggle. 1 second here. All right. The cattle of the sun. Instead of landing on Thrinacia as the crew expected, Ulysses dropped anchor and summoned his 2 under-chiefs, Eurylochus and Pyramides, to take counsel. He said, "You heard the warning of old Tiresias down in Tartarus. You heard him say that the island belongs to Hyperion, the Sun Titan, who uses it as a grazing land for his flocks. The warning was most dire. Whosoever of our crew harms these cattle in any way will bring swift doom upon himself and... Ooh, sorry, excuse me, I drank some water. All right, swift doom upon himself and will never see his home again." "We all heard the warning," said Eurylochus, "and everyone will heed it." "How can you be so sure?" said Ulysses. "If this voyage has taught me nothing else, it should have proved to you that there is nothing in the world so uncertain as man's intention, especially his good ones. No, good sirs, what I propose is that we change our plans about landing here and seek another island, one where death does not pasture." "It will never do," said Eurylochus. "The men are exhausted. There is no south wind blowing now, which means we would have to row. We simply do not have the strength to hold the oars." "Our stores are exhausted too," said Pyramides. "The food that Circe gave us is almost gone. The water kegs are empty. We must land here and let the men rest and lay in fresh provisions." "Very well," said Ulysses. "If it must be, it must be. But I am holding you 2 directly responsible for the safety of the sun cattle. Post guards at night and kill any man who goes near these fatal herds." Thereupon the anchor was raised and the ship put into harbor. Ulysses did not moor the ship offshore, but had the men drag it up on the beach. He sent 1 party out in search of game, another to fill the water kegs, and a third to chop down pine trees. From the wood was pressed a fragrant black sap, which was boiled in a big iron pot. Then he had the men tar the ship from stem to stern, caulking each crack. The hunting party returned, downhearted. There seemed to be no game on the island, they told Ulysses, only a few wild pigs, which they had shot, but no deer, no bear, no rabbits, no game birds, just the pigs and great herds of golden cattle. The water party returned triumphantly, barrels full. The men were so weary that Ulysses stood guard himself that night, wrapped in his cloak, naked sword around his across his knees, he sat hunched near the driftwood fire, brooding into the flames. I cannot let them rest here, he said to himself. If game is so scarce, they will be tempted to take the cattle. For hungry men, the only law is hunger. No, we must put out again tomorrow and try to find another island. The next morning, he routed up the men. They grumbled terribly, but did not dare to disobey. However, they were not fated to embark. A strong south wind blew up, almost gale strength, blowing directly into the harbor. There was no sailing into the teeth of it, and it was much too strong to row against. Very well, said Ulysses. Scour the island for game again. We must wait until the wind drops. He had thought it must blow itself out in a day or so, but it was not to be. For 30 days and 30 nights the south wind blew, and they could not leave the island. All the wild pigs had been killed. The men were desperately hungry. Ulysses used all of his cunning to find food. He had the men fish in the sea, dig the beaches for shellfish and turtle eggs, search the woods for edible roots and berries. They tore the clinging limpets off rocks and shot gulls. A huge pot was kept boiling over the driftwood fire, and in it the men threw anything remotely edible. Sea polyps, sea lilies, fish heads, sand crabs, vile broth. But most days they had nothing else, and they grew hungrier and hungrier. For 30 days the strong south wind blew, keeping them beached. Finally, one night, when Ulysses was asleep, Eurylochus secretly called the men together and said, Death comes to men in all sorts of ways, and however it comes, it is never welcome. But the worst of all deaths is to die of starvation, and to be forced to starve among herds of fat beef is a hellish torture that the gods reserve for the greatest criminals. So I say to you men that we must disregard the warning of the meddlesome ghost Circe and help ourselves to this cattle. We can do it now while Ulysses sleeps. And if indeed the Sun Titan is angered and seeks vengeance, well, at least we shall have had one more feast before dying. It was agreed. They went immediately into the meadow. Now Hyperion's cattle were the finest ever seen on earth. They were enormous, sleek, broad-backed, with crooked golden horns and hides of beautiful dappled gold and white. And when the men came among them with their axes, they were not afraid, for no one ever offered them any harm. They looked at the men with their great plum-colored eyes, whisked their tails, and continued grazing. The axes rose and fell. 6 fine cows were slaughtered. Because they knew they were committing an offense against the gods, the men were very careful to offer sacrifice. Upon a makeshift altar, they placed the fat thigh bones and burned them as offerings. They had no wine to pour upon the blazing meat as a libation, so they used water instead, chanting prayers as they watched the meat burn. But the smell of the rotting flesh overcame their piety. They leaped upon the carcasses like wild beasts, ripped them apart with their hands, stuck the flesh on spits, and plunged them into the open fire. Ulysses awoke from a dream of food. He sniffed the air and realized it was no dream. The smell of roasting meat was real. He lifted his face to the sky and said, Oh, mighty ones, it was unkind to let me fall into sleep, for now my men have done what they have been told they must not do. He drew his sword and rushed off to the light of the fire. But just then Zeus was hearing a more powerful plea, for the Sun Titan had been informed immediately by the quick spies that served the gods, and now he was raging upon Olympus. Oh, Father Zeus, he cried, I demand vengeance upon the comrades of Ulysses who have slaughtered my golden kine. If they are spared, I will withdraw my chariot from the sky. No longer will I warm the treacherous earth, but will go to Hades and shine among the dead. I hear you, cousin, said Zeus, and promise vengeance. Ulysses dashed among the feasting crew, ready to cut them down, even as they squatted there eating. Wait, said Eurylochus, hold your hand. These are not the sun god's cattle, but 7 stags we found on the other side of the island. Stags? Roared Ulysses. What kind of monstrous lie is this? You know there are no stags on this island. They were there, said Eurylochus, and now they are here. Perhaps the gods relented and sent them as food. Come, eat, dear friend, and do not invent misdeeds where none exist. Ulysses allowed himself to be persuaded, sat down among the men, and began to eat with ravenous speed. But then a strange thing happened. The spitted carcasses, turning over the fire, began to low and moo as though they were alive. One of the flayed hides crawled over the sand to Ulysses, and he saw that it was dappled gold and white, and he knew he had been tricked. Once again he seized his sword and rushed towards Eurylochus. Wait, cried Eurylochus. Do not blame me. We have not offended the gods by our trickery, for the south wind has fallen. See, the wind blows from the north now, and we can sail away. If the gods were angry, Ulysses, would they send us a fair wind? To the ship, shouted Ulysses. "We sail immediately." The men gathered up the meat that was left and followed Ulysses to the beached ship. They put logs under it and rolled it down to the sea. Here they unfurled the sail and slid out of the harbor. Night ran out, and the fires of dawn burned in the sky. The men hurried about their tasks, delighted to be well fed and sailing again after the starving month on Thrinacia. But then Ulysses observing the sky, saw a strange sight. The sun seemed to be frowning. He saw that black clouds had massed in front of it. He heard a rustling noise and looked off westward, where he saw the water ruffling darkly. "Down sail," he shouted. "Ship the mast." Too late. A wild west wind came hurtling across the water and pounced on the ship. There was no time to do anything. Both forestays snapped. The mast split and fell, laying its white sail like a shroud over the ship. A lightning bolt flared from the blue sky and struck amidships. Great billows of choking yellow smoke arose. The heat was unbearable. Ulysses saw his men diving off the deck, garments and hair ablaze, and hissing like cinders as they hit the water. He was still shouting commands, trying to chop the sail free and fighting against gale and fire, but he was all alone. Not one man was aboard. The ship fell apart beneath him. The ribs were torn from the keel. The ship was nothing but a mast of flaming timbers, and Ulysses swam among them. He held on to the mast, which had not burned, pushing it before him. He swam out of the blazing wreckage. He found the keel floating free. The oxhide backstay was still tied to the head of the mast. With it he lashed mast and keel together into a kind of raft. He looked about, trying to find someone to pull aboard. There was no one. He had no way of steering the raft, but had to go where the wind blew him. And now, to his dismay, he found the wind shifting again. It blew from the south, which meant that he would be pushed back toward the terrible strait. All day he drifted, and all night. When dawn came, it brought with it a roaring, sucking sound, and he saw that he was being drawn between Scylla and Charybdis. He felt the raft being pulled toward the whirlpool. It was that very moment when Charybdis took her first drink of the day. She swallowed the tide and held it in her great bladder of a belly. The raft spun like a leaf in the outer eddies of the huge section, and Ulysses knew when he reached the vortex of the whirlpool that he and the raft would be drawn to the bottom, and that he must drown. He kept his footing on the raft until the very last moment, and just as it was pulled into the vortex, he leaped as high as he could upon the naked face of the rock, scrambling for a handhold. He caught a lump of lichen and clung with all his strength. He could climb no higher on the rock. It was too slippery for a foothold. All he could do was cling to the moss and pray that his strength would not give out. He was waiting for Charybdis to spit forth the tide again. The long hours passed. His shoulders felt as though they were being torn apart by red-hot pincers. Finally, he heard a great tumult of waters and saw it frothing out of the cave. The waves leaped toward his feet, and when he saw that he was what he was waiting for, his raft came shooting up like a cork. He dropped upon the timbers. Now he would have some hours of quiet water, he knew, before Charybdis drank again. So he kept to that side of the strait, holding as far from Scylla as he could, for he well remembered the terrible reach of her arms. He passed safely beyond the rocks and out of the strait. For 9 days he drifted under the burning sun, 9 nights under the indifferent moon. With his knife he cut a long splinter from the timbers and shaped it into a lance for spearing fish. He did not get any. Then he lay on his back, pretending to be dead, and gulls came to peck out his eyes. He caught them and wrung their necks. He ate their flesh and drank their blood, and so stayed alive. On the 10th day he found himself approaching another island. He was very weak. The island grew dim as he looked at it. A black mist hid the land, which was odd because the sun was shining. Then the sky tilted, and the black mist covered him. And there we have it. I think we're going to just do this one last chapter and be done for now. This next one is called Calypso. After this, I'm going to do a little bit more on Twitch. I'm going to play some games, but I will be done with my recording, so I will stop it there. But last chapter for right now, and then we'll have next week, Wednesday, I'll finish up the book, And then we will move on to Sherlock Holmes next week, Friday. It'll be exciting. All right. Calypso. When Ulysses awoke, he found himself lying on a bed of sweet-smelling grass. The sun shone hotly, but he was in a pool of delicious cool shade under a poplar tree. He was still dizzy. The trees were swaying, and bright flowers danced upon the meadow. He closed his eyes, thinking, I am dead then. The god that hunts me took pity and shortened my hard life, and I am now in the Elysian fields. A voice answered, You have not died. You are not in the Elysian fields. You have come home. He opened his eyes again. A woman was bending over him. She was so tall that he knew she was no mortal woman, but nymph or naiad or demigoddess. She was clad in a short tunic of yellow and purple. Her hair was yellow and long and thick. You are here with me, she said. You have come home. Home? Is this Ithaca? Are you Penelope? This is, how do I say that word? Ogygia, and I am Calypso. He tried to sit up. He was too weak. But Ithaca is my home, he said, and Penelope is my wife. Home is where you dwell, and wives, I am told, often change, especially for sailors, especially for you. And now you belong to me, because this island and everything on it is mine. Ulysses went back to sleep, for he believed he was dreaming and did not wish to wake up again and find himself on the raft. But when he awoke, he was still in his dream. He was strong enough now to sit up and look around. He was in a great grove hemmed by trees, alder and poplar and cypress. Across the meadow, 4 streams ran, crossing each other, making a sound like soft laughter. The meadow was a carpet of wildflowers, violets, parsley, bluebells, daffodils, and cat-faced pansies. His bed had been made in front of a grotto he saw. Over it, a wild grapevine that had been trained to fall like a curtain. The vine curtain was pushed aside, and Calypso came out. You are awake, she cried, and just in time for your wedding feast. The stag is roasted. The wine has been poured. No, don't move. You're still too weak. Let me help you, little husband. She stooped and lifted him in her great white arms and carried him as easily as though he were a child in the grotto and set him before the hearth. A whole stag was spitted over the flame. The cave was carpeted with the skins of leopard and wolf and bear. Lovely and gracious goddess, said Ulysses, tell me, please, how I came here. The last I remember, I was on a raft, and then a blackness fell. I was watching for you, said Calypso. I knew you would come, and I was waiting. Then your raft floated into sight. I saw you slump over and roll off the raft, and I changed you into a fish, for sharks live in this water, and they are always hungry. As soon as I turned you into a fish, a gull stooped, and he would have had you, but I shot him with my arrow. Then I took my net and fished you out, restored you to your proper shape, fed you a broth of herbs, and I let you sleep. That was your arrival, oh man I have drawn from the sea. As for your departure, that will never be. Now eat your meat and drink your wine, for I like my husbands well fed. Ulysses ate and drank and felt his strength return. After all, he thought, things could be worse. In fact, they have been much worse. This may turn out to be quite a pleasant interlude. She is certainly beautiful, this Calypso, rather large for my taste and inclined to be bossy, I'm afraid, but who's perfect? He turned to her smiling and said, You say you were waiting for me, watching from a raft. How did you know I would be coming? I am one of the Titan brood, said Calypso, daughter of mighty Atlas, who stands upon the westward rim of the world, bearing the sky upon his shoulders. We are the elder branch of the gods, we Titans. For us there is no before or after, only now, wherein all things are, and always were, and always will be. Time, you see, is a little arrangement man has made for himself to try to measure the immeasurable mystery of life. It does not really exist. So when we want to know anything that has happened, or what you call before, or what will happen in what you call after, we simply shuffle the pictures and look at them. I don't think I understand. I have watched your whole voyage, Ulysses. All I have to do is poke a log in a certain way, and pictures form in the heart of the fire, and burn there until I poke the log again. What would you like to see? My wife, Penelope. Calypso reached her long arm and poked the log, and in the heart of the flame Ulysses saw a woman weaving. She looks older, he said. Well, you have been away a long time. Only the immortals do not age. I was 2,300 years old today. Look at me. Do you see any wrinkles? Poor Penelope, said Ulysses. Don't pity her too much. She has plenty of company. She is presumed to be a widow, you know. Has she married again? I weary of this picture. Would you like to see another? My son, Telemachus. She poked the fire again, and Ulysses saw the flickering image of a tall young man with red golden hair. He held a spear in his hand and looked angry. How he has grown, murmured Ulysses. He was a baby when I left. He is a young man now, and a fine one, is he not? Looks like his father, said Calypso. He seems to be defying some enemy, said Ulysses. What is happening? He is trying to drive away his mother's suitors, who live in your castle now. She is quite popular for an older woman. But then, of course, she has land and goods, a rich widow. You left her well provided, O sailor. She has many suitors and cannot decide among them, or perhaps she enjoys their courtship too much to decide. But your son is very proud of his father, whom he does not remember, and seeks to drive the suitors from your castle. I had better go home and help him, said Ulysses. Put that out of your mind. It simply will not happen. Forget Ithaca, Ulysses. You are a hero, a mighty hero, and heroes have many homes, and the last is always the best. Look at this. See some of your exploits? Like many warriors, you were too busy fighting to know what really happened. She poked the log again and again, and a stream of pictures flowed through the fire. Ulysses saw himself standing on a rock in the Cyclops' cave, holding the white-hot sword above the great sleeping eye, preparing to stab it in. He saw himself wrestling with the leather bag of winds that Aeolus had given him, saw himself running with the wolves and lions who had been Circe's lovers in the dark courtyard of her castle. Then, sword in hand, he saw himself hacking at Scylla's tentacles as she reached across the tilting deck for his men. Going back, he saw himself before his homeward voyage, crouched in the black belly of the wooden horse he had made. Next, climbing out of that horse after it had been dragged into the city and racing with lifted sword to slaughter the sleeping Trojan warriors. And as he watched and saw the old battles refought, the men who had been his friends and the monstrous enemies he had overcome, his heart sang with pride, and a drunken warmth stronger than the fumes of wine rose to his head, drowning out all the pictures of home. He stood up and said, Thank you for showing me myself, Calypso. I do seem to be a hero, don't I? And worthy to love a daughter of the Titans. Yes, said Calypso. Water break. Hold on, guys. Now, Calypso had amused herself with shipwreck sailors before, but she was hard to please, and none of them had lasted very long. When she was tired of someone, she would throw him back into the sea. If she were feeling good-natured, she would change him into a gull or fish first. Indeed, the trees of the grove were filled with nesting seabirds, gull and heron and osprey and sand owls, who called to her at night, reproaching her. What is that clamor of birds? Said Ulysses. Just birds. Why do they shriek so? They are angry at me for loving you. They were men once like yourself. How did they get to be birds? Oh, well, it's no very difficult transformation when you know how. I thought they would be happier so. They don't sound very happy. They have jealous natures. You are not unlike Circe in some ways, said Ulysses. You island goddesses are apt to be abrupt with your former friends. I've noticed this. It is a depressing topic, dear. Let's talk about me. Do you find me beautiful today? More beautiful than yesterday, if that is possible. And no doubt will find you even lovelier tomorrow, since you have shown me the penalty of any inattention. Do not fear, said Calypso. You are not like the others. You are bolder and have more imagination. You are a hero. Perhaps you could persuade your feathered friends to nest elsewhere? They make me nervous. Nothing easier. I shall simply tell them to depart. If they do not, I shall change them all to grasshoppers, all save one, who will eat the rest and then die of overeating. Truly, you are wise and powerful, and fair beyond all women, mortal or immortal. She smiled. You have such an apt way of putting things, she said. So Ulysses made himself at home on the island and passed the time hunting game, fishing the sea, and reveling with the beautiful Calypso. He was happy. Thoughts of home grew dim. The nymph taught him how to poke the magic log upon her hearth so that it would cast up fire pictures. And he sat by the hour on that great hearth, reading the flickering tapestry of days gone by and days to come. But she had instructed the log never to show him scenes of Ithaca, for she wished him not to be reminded of his home in any way, lest he be tempted to depart. But Ulysses was crafty as she was, and after he had poked the logs many times, asking it to show him what was happening on his island, and the log had cast up pictures of other times, other places, he realized that Calypso had laid a magic veto upon scenes of home. And this, instead of making him forget, made him more eager than ever to know what was happening to Telemachus and Penelope. One day he went into the wood, snared a sea crow, and asked, "Can you speak?" "Yes," said the crow. "Were you once a man?" Once. At the time of your grandfather Sisyphus, I was a clever man, a spy. That's why Calypso changed me into a crow when she grew weary of me. For all creatures, we are the best for spying and prying and tattling." "Then you're the bird for me," said Ulysses. "Listen, I wish you to fly to Ithaca. Go to my castle and see what is happening. Then come back and tell me." "Why should I? What will you give me?" "Your life." "My life? I already have that. But not for long. Because if you refuse to do as I ask, I shall wring your neck." Said the crow. "There is merit in your argument. Very well, I shall be your spy. Only don't let Calypso know. She'll catch me and feed me to the cat before I can report to you. I have a notion she'd like you to forget Ithaca." "Fly away, little bird," said Ulysses, "and do what you have to do. I'll take care of things here." The next day at dusk, he was returning from the hunt. He heard the crow calling from the depth of an oak tree. "Greetings," said Ulysses. "Have you done what I asked?" "I have flown to Ithaca," said the crow. "A rough journey by sea, but not really so far as the crow flies. I flew to your castle and perched by an embrasure and watched and watched. Briefly, your son is grieving, your wife is weaving, and your guests are not leaving." "What does my wife weave?" "Your shroud." "Has she decided so soon that I am dead?" "I have been gone scarcely 20 years. "She is faithful, but the suitors, who are brawling, ill-mannered young men, are pressing her to choose one of them for a husband. However, she refuses to choose until she finishes the shroud, and it has been 3 years a-weaving, for each night she rips up the work she has done by day, so the shroud is never finished. But the suitors grow impatient. They are demanding that she finish her weaving and choose a groom. Your son opposes them, and they threaten to kill him unless he steps aside." "Thank you, Crow," said Ulysses. "What will you do now? Try to escape?" "Escape? I do not consider myself a captive, good bird. I shall simply inform Calypso that I intend to leave and ask her to furnish the transportation." "Make it sound easy," said the crow. "Good luck." And he flew away. Ulysses went to Calypso in her grotto, fell to his knees before her, and said, "Fair and gracious friend, you have made me happier than any man has a right to be, especially an unlucky one. But now I must ask you one last great favor." Calypso frowned. "I don't like the sound of that," she said. "What do you mean last? Why should I not go on doing you favors?" "I must go home." "This is your home." "No, my home is Ithaca. Penelope is my wife. Telemachus is my son. I have enemies. They live in my castle and steal my goods. They wish to kill my son and take my wife. I am a king. I cannot tolerate insults. I must go home." "Suppose you do go home. What then?" "I will contend with my enemies. I will kill them or they will kill me." "You kill them, say. Then what?" "Then I live. I rule. I don't know. I cannot read the future." "I can. Look." She poked the magic log. Fire pictures flared. Ulysses saw himself sitting on his throne. He was an old man. Penelope was there. She was an old woman. "You will grow old. Old," Calypso's voice murmured in his ears, unraveling in its rough purring way like raw silk. "Old, old. You will live on memories. You will eat your heart out recalling old glories, old battles, old loves. Look into the fire." "Is that me?" "That's you, humping along in your old age among your hills, grown dry and cruel." "What is that on my shoulder?" "An oar." "Why do I carry an oar where there is no sea?" "If you go back to Ithaca, you will meet great trouble. You will be driven from your throne and be forced to carry an oar on your shoulder until you come to a place where no man salts his meat and where they think the oar is a winnowing fan. Then, if you abase yourself to Poseidon, he may forget his hatred for a while and grant you a few more years." "Is that me standing at the shore?" "That is you." "Who is that young man?" "Your son." "Not Telemachus." "Another son, a fiercer one." "Why does his spirit look so strange?" It is tipped with the beak of a stingray. Why does he raise it against me? To kill you, of course, and so death will come to you from the sea at the hands of your own son, for you angered the god of the sea by wounding his son, and he does not forgive. She tapped the log, and the fire died. Do you still want to go back to Ithaca? She said. Will my future be different if I stay here? Certainly. If you stay with me, it will be entirely different. You will no longer be a mortal man. I will make you my eternal consort, make you immortal. You will not die or grow old. This will be your home, not only the island, but wherever the Titans rule. Never die, never grow old. It seems impossible. You are a man to whom impossible things happen, said Calypso. Haven't you learned that by now? Never, said Ulysses. Always. These are words I find hard to accept. Do not think you will be bored. I am expert at variety. I deal in transformations, you know. I can change our forms at will. We can love each other as lion and lioness, fox and vixen, touch high as eagles, twine as serpents, be stallion and mare. We can fly and prowl and swim. You can be a whale once and seek me deeply, or a tomcat perhaps, weird voice burning in the night, crying murder and amour. And then we can return to this powered island as Calypso and Ulysses, goddess and hero. You are eloquent, said Ulysses, and you need no eloquence, for your beauty speaks more than any words. Still I cannot be immortal, never to die, never to grow old. What use is courage then? Calypso smiled at him. Enough discussion for one night. You have time to decide. Take 5 or 10 years. We are in no hurry, you and I. 5 or 10 years may seem little to an immortal, said Ulysses, but I am still a man. It is a long time for me. That's just what I said Calypso. It is better to be immortal and think it over. The next morning, instead of hunting, Ulysses went to the other side of the island and built an altar of rocks and sacrificed to the gods. He poured a libation of unwatered wine and raised his voice. O great gods upon Olympus, thunder-wielding Zeus and wise Athene, earth-shaking Poseidon, whom I have offended, golden Apollo, hear my prayer. For 10 years I fought in Troy, and for 10 more years I have wandered the sea, been hounded from island to island, battered by storms, swallowed by tides. My ships have been wrecked, my men killed. But you have granted me life. Now I pray you, take back the gift. Let me join my men in Tartarus, for if I cannot return home, if I have to be kept here as a prisoner of Calypso while my kingdom is looted, my son slain and my wife stolen, then I do not wish to live. Allow me to go home, or strike me dead on the spot. His prayer was carried to Olympus. Athene heard it. She went to Zeus and asked him to call the gods into council. They met in the huge throne room. As it happened, Poseidon was absent. He had ridden a tidal wave into Africa where he had never been and was visiting the Ethiopians. Athene said, O Father Zeus, O brother gods, I wish to speak on behalf of Ulysses, who all of the mighty wars we sent to Troy has the most respect for our power and the most belief in our justice. 10 years after leaving the bloody beaches of Troy, he has still not reached home. He is penned now on an island by Calypso, daughter of Atlas, who uses all of her titanic enticements to keep him prisoner. This man's plight challenges our justice. Let us help him now. Zeus said, I do not care to be called unjust. I am forgetful sometimes, perhaps, but then I have much to think of, many affairs to manage. And remember, please, my daughter, that this man has been traveling the sea, which belongs to my brother Poseidon, whom he has offended. Poseidon holds a heavy grudge, as you know. He does not forgive injuries. Ulysses would have been home years ago if he had not chosen to blind Polyphemus, who happens to be Poseidon's son. He has paid for that eye over and over again, cried Athene. Many times its worth, I vow. And the Earthshaker's not here, as it happens. He is off shaking the earth of Africa, which has been too dry and peaceful for his taste. Let us take advantage of his absence and allow Ulysses to resume his voyage. Very well, said Zeus. It shall be as you advise. So close. Okay. Getting close, guys. Trying to get this done in under 2 hours here. Thereupon he dispatched Hermes, the messenger god of Ogygia. Hermes found Calypso on the beach, singing a wild sea song, imitating now the voice of the wind, now the lisping, scraping sound of waves on a shallow shore, weaving in the cry of heron and gull and osprey, tide suck and drowned moons. Now Hermes had invented pipe and lyre and loved music. When he heard Calypso singing her wild sea song, he stood upon the bright air Ankle wings whirring, entranced, he hovered there, listening to her sing. Dolphins were drawn to her voice. They stood in the surf and danced on their tails. She finished her song. Hermes landed lightly beside her. A beautiful song, he said. A sad song. All beautiful songs are sad. Yes. Why is that? They are love songs. Women love men and they go away. This is very sad. You know why I have come then. Of course. What else would bring you here? The Olympians have looked down and seen me happy for a little while. And they have decreed that this must not be. They have sent you to take my love away. I am sorry, cousin, but it is fated that he find his way home. Fate, destiny. What are they but fancy words for the brutal decrees of Zeus? He cannot abide that goddesses should mate with mortal men. He is jealous, and that is the whole truth of it. He wants us all for himself. Don't deny it. When Eos, goddess of dawn, chose Orion for her lover, Zeus had his daughter Artemis slay her with her arrows. When Demeter, harvest wife, met Jason in the plowed fields, Zeus himself flung his bolt, crippling him. It is always the same. He allowed Ulysses to be shipwrecked time and again. When I found him, he was righting the timbers of his lost ship and was about to drown, so I took him here with me, cherished him, and offered to make him immortal. And now Zeus suddenly remembers, after 20 years, that he must go home immediately because it is ordained? You can't fight Zeus, said Hermes gently. Why try? What do you want me to do? Permit Ulysses to make himself a raft. See that he has provisions, then let him depart. So be it. Do not despair, sweet cousin. You are too beautiful for sorrow. There will be other storms, other shipwrecks, on other sailors. Never another like him. Who knows? He kissed her on the cheek and flew away. All right, we are going to stop there for tonight. I did it in under 2 hours. We are quite a ways into the book. We only have one little bit left, and I'm going to finish it up on Wednesday. So come back and see me on Wednesday. All right. Thank you guys. Happy reading.